Jonathan Reed wasn't your average billionaire CEO. Sure, he ran one of the largest airlines in the world, Skylink Airlines, but lately, something didn't feel right. Sitting in his corner office on the 40th floor, surrounded by glass walls and sleek furniture, he couldn't shake off the feeling that he was losing touch with reality. His customers were complaining online, employees seemed unhappy, and passenger satisfaction scores were dropping faster than turbulence on a stormy flight. He tried everything to fix it: fancy meetings, expensive consultants, glossy PR campaigns, but none of it worked. One evening, as he scrolled through social media after a long day at work, he stumbled upon a clip from an old TV show where a CEO went undercover to see how their company really operated. That's when it hit him, a spark of inspiration. What if he did the same? The idea sounded crazy, even for someone like Jonathan, but deep down, he knew it made sense. He hadn't flown economy class in decades. When was the last time he'd stood in line at security or waited anxiously for his luggage to appear on the carousel? Probably never. If he wanted to understand what his passengers truly experienced, he needed to step out of his shiny suit and into their shoes. So, early, one Monday morning, Jonathan walked into a local department store and bought clothes that screamed, "Ordinary guy." A pair of worn-out jeans, sneakers that looked like they'd seen better days, and a plain baseball cap to hide his neatly styled hair. Back home, he swapped his designer watch for a cheap digital one and tucked his usual leather briefcase away. In its place, he carried a small beat-up backpack filled with random items, a notebook, a pen, and some snacks. For good measure, he slipped on a pair of glasses that slightly altered his appearance. Standing in front of the mirror, he barely recognized himself. Was this really him? Jonathan Reed, the man who once shook hands with presidents and cut ribbons at international airports? It felt surreal, almost like playing dress-up. But there was no turning back now. This was happening. With his ticket booked under the name Jim Reynolds, Jonathan arrived at the airport 2 hours before departure. Walking through the terminal felt strange. People rushed past him without giving him a second glance. No one stopped him to ask for autographs or business advice. No assistants trailed behind him holding coffee cups or folders. For the first time in years, he blended in completely. As he joined the long queue at the check-in counter, Jonathan noticed things he'd never paid attention to before. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a harsh glow on tired travelers dragging suitcases. Families argued over missed connections while solo flyers scrolled endlessly on their phones. At the baggage drop-off, a mother struggled to lift her oversized suitcase onto the scale. No staff member stepped forward to help her. When it was finally his turn, Jonathan handed over his passport and boarding pass to the agent. She barely glanced up from her screen, her tone robotic as she confirmed his details. "Next," she called out, dismissing him without so much as a smile. He hesitated for a moment, tempted to introduce himself. But then he remembered. He wasn't Jonathan Reed today. He was Jim, just another passenger trying to get somewhere. Boarding the plane proved equally eye-opening. Economy class seating stretched endlessly, row after row of cramped chairs bolted tightly together. As he shuffled down the narrow aisle, dodging elbows and knees, Jonathan realized how different this experience was compared to his usual private jet rides. Finally finding his seat near the middle of the plane, he stowed his backpack and settled. And the flight attendants moved briskly through the cabin preparing for takeoff. Outside the window, ground crew members scurried around, signaling to the pilots. Everything seemed normal until the engines roared to life and the plane began taxiing toward the runway. That's when Jonathan heard voices behind him. Two young boys talking animatedly about their travel woes. Their words stopped him cold. One boy said, "I hate flying with this airline. Last time we flew, Mom got so mad because our bags were lost, and they made us wait forever at the gate." The other chimed in, "Yeah, and the snacks are gross. I don't even think they're real food." Jonathan froze, his heart sinking. These kids weren't holding back. They were saying exactly what thousands of his customers thought, but rarely voiced aloud. And here he was, sitting right in front of them, hearing it all firsthand. Curiosity got the better of him. Turning slightly in his seat, he decided to strike up a conversation. Little did he know, this simple act would set off a chain of events that would change his perspective and his entire airline forever. The two boys sitting behind Jonathan were full of energy, their voices carrying just enough for him to catch every word. They weren't trying to be loud, they were just kids being kids, chatting without filters. And that's what made their words so powerful. Their honesty cut through the hum of the airplane engines and the muffled announcements from the flight crew. Jonathan turned slightly in his seat, pretending to adjust his backpack while glancing back at them. The younger boy was leaning forward, his elbows resting on the tray table, while the older one sat cross-legged, arms folded like he was some kind of expert on air travel. Both wore matching sneakers and backpacks, clearly part of a family trip. "You know what else is bad?" the younger boy said, wrinkling his nose. "The Wi-Fi never works. We wanted to watch cartoons last time, but it kept cutting off. It wasn't even funny." "Yeah," the older boy agreed, nodding vigorously. "And the snacks are disgusting. I mean, who eats those tiny bags of pretzels? They taste like cardboard." Jonathan couldn't help but chuckle softly under his breath. Kids always had a way of saying things exactly how they felt, no sugarcoating involved. He found himself wanting to hear more. These weren't just complaints. They were insights into what real passengers thought about Skylink Airlines. Insights that up until now he'd been completely blind to. Taking a deep breath, Jonathan decided to join their conversation. Turning halfway around, he gave them a friendly smile. "Hey there," he said warmly. "You guys sound like you've flown before. What's your least favorite part?" Both boys looked surprised that an adult was actually paying attention to them. For a moment they hesitated, unsure whether to answer or not. But curiosity won out. The younger boy leaned closer, his eyes wide. "Are you flying with us too?" he asked. "Sure am," Jonathan replied, keeping his tone casual. "Just another traveler like you." That seemed to break the ice. The older boy grinned mischievously. "Well, if you really want to know, everything about this airline stinks. First, the seats are super uncomfortable. My legs hurt after sitting for too long. Second, the food is gross. Third," he paused dramatically, looking at his brother, for backup. "Third, the staff doesn't care, like at all." Jonathan felt a pang of guilt, but forced himself to stay calm. He nodded slowly, encouraging them to keep going. "Go on," he said. "Tell me more." The younger boy jumped, in eagerly. "Last time we flew, our mom got so mad because they lost our luggage. We waited forever at the baggage claim, and when it finally showed up, one of her bags was ripped open. Stuff was falling out everywhere. And don't forget the delays," the older boy added, rolling his eyes. "We missed our connection, once because the plane was late. Mom had to call someone to pick us up at midnight, she was so mad." Listening to them talk, Jonathan realized something. These boys weren't exaggerating. Every single thing they mentioned, lost luggage, delayed flights, poor customer service, had come up in reports and surveys countless times. But hearing it straight from the mouths of children made it hit differently. It wasn't just data anymore. It was personal. He scribbled a few notes discreetly in his phone, careful not to draw too much attention. Then, leaning back slightly, he asked, "So, what would make flying better for you guys? If you could change anything, what would it be?" The younger boy didn't hesitate. "Better snacks," he declared with a grin, "like cookies or chips, something good. More legroom," the older boy chimed in. "And faster Wi-Fi. Oh, and maybe nicer people working here. Someone who actually smiles instead of acting like they hate their job." Jonathan nodded thoughtfully. These suggestions weren't groundbreaking, but they mattered. To these boys, and probably thousands of other passengers, they mattered a lot. He glanced over his shoulder again, noticing how animated they'd become. Talking about their gripes had turned into a lively debate between the two siblings, each trying to outdo the other with examples of frustrating experiences. For a brief moment, Jonathan considered revealing his true identity. Would it shock them to learn they were venting to the CEO of the very airline they were criticizing? Probably. But he held back. Instead, he simply smiled and said, "Thanks for sharing. You're helping me understand things better." The boys exchanged confused looks but shrugged it off. Adults were weird sometimes, right? Still, they appreciated having someone listen to them. Most grown-ups tuned out kids' opinions, treating them as unimportant. But this guy, this random guy in the baseball cap, actually cared. As the plane climbed higher into the sky, Jonathan leaned back in his seat, letting their words sink in. He'd expected to learn something by going undercover, but he hadn't anticipated feeling this heavy. Each complaint, each suggestion, weighed on him like a reminder of how far his company had drifted from its mission to serve customers well. But the conversation wasn't over yet. A few minutes later, a woman seated across the aisle leaned forward, catching Jonathan's eye. She looked tired, her hair pulled back into a messy bun, but her expression softened when she spoke. "I'm sorry if my boys were too loud," she said apologetically. "They can get carried away sometimes." Jonathan shook his head quickly. "No, please don't apologize. I actually enjoy hearing what people think, especially when it's honest." The woman raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised. "Honest? Huh? Well, if you're into honesty, let me tell you something. Flying isn't easy. Not for families like mine, anyway." Her voice carried a mix of frustration and resignation, and Jonathan braced himself for what came next. Whatever she had to say, he knew it wouldn't be sugar-coated, and he was right. She went on to explain how tough it was to balance cost, convenience, and reliability when planning trips. Her husband had passed away years ago, leaving her to raise the boys alone. Skylink was often the only affordable option, but every flight felt like a gamble. Sometimes it went smoothly, but other times the problems piled up. Delays, rude staff, broken promises. "It's not just about the money," she continued, her voice softening. "It's about feeling respected, like you matter as a customer. But most days it feels like we're invisible." Jonathan listened intently, his chest tightening with every word. This wasn't just feedback, it was a plea. A cry for better. Treatment, for empathy, for understanding. And it was coming from someone who relied on his airline not for luxury, but for necessity. By the time she finished speaking, Jonathan knew one thing for certain. This undercover experiment had already changed him. He wasn't just gathering information anymore. He was learning lessons about humanity, responsibility, and leadership that no boardroom meeting could ever teach. As the plane soared above the clouds, Jonathan stared out the window, lost in thought. The boys' laughter echoed faintly behind him, mingling with the steady hum of the engines. Outside, the sky stretched endlessly, vast and untouchable. Inside, however, the weight of reality pressed down on him, urging him to act. The conversation with the boys and their mom had left Jonathan feeling a mix of emotions: guilt, responsibility, and a strange sense of hope. He'd spent years building Skylink Airlines into a global powerhouse, but now he realized how disconnected he'd become from the very people it was meant to serve. Sitting there in his economy-class seat, surrounded by passengers who were counting on his airline to get them where they needed to go, he felt a weight he couldn't ignore. The woman across the aisle had opened up in a way that took him by surprise. She wasn't just sharing complaints, she was telling her story. Her words painted a picture of someone doing her best to hold things together while navigating life's challenges. Flying wasn't a luxury for her. It was a necessity. Every trip mattered because it connected her to family, memories, or opportunities. And yet, instead of making her journey easier, Skylink often made it harder. Jonathan wanted to say something meaningful, something that would let her know he understood. But what could he possibly say without blowing his cover? Instead, he leaned forward slightly, keeping his tone casual but sincere. "You're right," he said. "People should feel respected when they fly. It sounds like you've been through a lot, and I'm sorry if my company hasn't made things easier for you." Her eyes widened in surprise. Most people tuned out her frustrations or dismissed them as unimportant. But this stranger, this guy in the baseball cap, was actually listening. For a moment she seemed unsure how to respond. Then, with a small smile, she said, "Thanks for saying that. Not many people care enough to listen." Jonathan nodded slowly, his mind racing. How many others felt the same way? How many passengers boarded Skylink flights every day, hoping for a smooth experience but bracing themselves for disappointment instead? The thought haunted him. He glanced around the cabin, noticing the tired faces, the restless kids, the couples whispering quietly to each other. Each person carried their own story, their own reasons for being here. Yet somehow his airline had failed to see them as individuals. Determined to learn more, Jonathan turned back to the boys. "What about the staff?" he asked. "Do you guys ever meet anyone who makes flying better? Someone who goes out of their way to help?" The younger boy tilted his head, thinking hard. There was this one lady at the gate last year. She gave me stickers and told me I could sit near the window. That was cool." "Yeah," the older boy agreed. "And once a flight attendant let us have extra snacks because we were hungry. But that doesn't happen much." Jonathan smiled, faintly. Even in a system riddled with problems, there were still moments of kindness. Those interactions might seem small, but they meant the world to passengers. They reminded people that behind the uniforms and procedures were human beings, capable of empathy. He scribbled another note in his phone, reminding himself to highlight these positive examples during his next leadership meeting. Maybe rewarding employees for going above and beyond could inspire others to do the same. It was a start, at least. As the flight continued, Jonathan found himself glancing back at the boys and their mom more often than he intended. They weren't celebrities or influencers, they were ordinary people living ordinary lives. But their voices carried extraordinary weight. Their stories revealed cracks in the foundation of his company, cracks he hadn't noticed until now. Eventually, curiosity got the better of the boy's mom. Leaning forward again, she studied his face carefully. "You seem really interested in all this," she said. "Do you work for an airline or something?" Jonathan hesitated. Should he tell her the truth? No, not yet. Instead, he gave her a vague answer. "Let's just say I have some influence where I work. If I hear enough feedback, maybe I can push for changes." She laughed softly, shaking her head. "Good luck with that. Most companies don't care unless it affects their bottom line." Skepticism stung, but Jonathan didn't blame her. After everything she'd been through, it made sense that she'd lost faith in big corporations. Still, her comment fueled his determination. He couldn't fix everything overnight, but he could try, one step at a time. The plane hit a patch of turbulence, jolting everyone awake. Passengers gripped their armrests, murmuring nervously as the seatbelt sign lit up overhead. Jonathan instinctively reached for the buckle, securing it tightly. Beside him, a young woman clutched her phone, her knuckles white. Across the aisle, the boy's mom wrapped a protective arm around her youngest son, whispering reassurances in his ear. It struck Jonathan how vulnerable air travel made people feel. Strapped into narrow seats thousands of feet above the ground, they had no choice but to trust the airline and its staff to keep them safe. When that trust was broken, even in small ways, it added up. Lost luggage, delayed flights, rude gate agents, it all chipped away at passengers' confidence. And restoring that trust wouldn't be easy. When the turbulence subsided, the cabin relaxed again. Flight attendants resumed their rounds, offering drinks and snacks. Jonathan watched them closely, noting how some interacted warmly with passengers, while others moved mechanically, barely making eye contact. It was clear that attitude mattered. A lot. A simple smile or kind word could turn a frustrating experience into a tolerable one. On the flip side, indifference could make even minor inconveniences feel unbearable. As the hours passed, Jonathan kept jotting down observations. He noted the cramped seating arrangement, the lack of legroom, and the uncomfortable angle of the tray tables. He paid attention to the quality of the food, or lack thereof, and the speed of the in-flight Wi-Fi. He listened to snippets of conversations around him, picking up on recurring themes. Long lines, confusing policies, and inconsistent service. But it wasn't just about collecting data. This experience was teaching him something deeper, importance of empathy. Running a business wasn't just about profits and efficiency. It was about understanding the needs, fears, and hopes of the people you served. It was about seeing them not as numbers on a spreadsheet, but as human beings with real lives and real struggles. By the time the captain announced their descent, John 208th felt exhausted, but also strangely energized. He'd come aboard this flight expecting to gather insights, but he'd ended up learning far more than he bargained for. His perspective had shifted in ways he couldn't have predicted. Before landing, he turned to the boys and their mom one last time. "Listen," he said, lowering his voice so only they could hear. "I know I can't fix everything right away, but I promise you this. I'll do whatever I can to make flying better for families like yours. If you ever need anything, reach out to me directly." He pulled out a small piece of paper and quickly wrote down his email address. Handing it to her, he added, "Tell them Jim sent you." The mom stared at the note, then back at him. There was a flicker of doubt in her eyes, but also a glimmer of hope. "Jim, huh?" she said with a faint smile. "You sound like a man who keeps his promises." "I do," Jonathan replied firmly. As the plane touched down and passengers began gathering their belongings, Jonathan felt a renewed sense of purpose. This undercover experiment wasn't just about improving Skylink. It was about reconnecting with the humanity at the heart of his business, and he knew exactly where to start. As the plane taxied toward the gate, Jonathan felt a mix of emotions swirling inside him. The flight had been an eye-opener, no doubt about it. He'd heard things he couldn't unhear, raw, honest feedback from people who relied on his airline to connect them to loved ones, jobs, and opportunities. But now came the hard part, turning those words into action. The boy's mom glanced at the piece of paper in her hand one more time before tucking it carefully into her purse. She still looked skeptical, like she didn't quite believe this stranger. This Jim could actually make a difference. But there was also a flicker of hope in her eyes, something Jonathan hadn't seen earlier. It was subtle, but it mattered. That tiny glimmer reminded him why he'd started this undercover journey in the first place. When the seatbelt sign finally turned off, passengers began standing up, stretching their legs and reaching for their bags. The aisle quickly filled, with the usual chaos, people jockeying for position, kids complaining about being squished, and flight attendants urging everyone to wait their turn. Jonathan stayed seated for a moment longer, watching the scene unfold. It struck him how much stress such a simple process could cause. Even something as routine as deplaning felt rushed and impersonal. "Ready?" the mom asked her boys, nudging them gently. They nodded, grabbing their backpacks and scrambling to join the line. As they passed by Jonathan's seat, the older boy hesitated for a second. Turning back, he said, "Thanks for listening, mister." Jonathan smiled warmly. "Anytime, kid. Safe travels." The sincerity in his voice caught the mom's attention again. She paused mid-step, studying him closely. For a brief moment, it seemed like she wanted to say something, but then she shook her head and continued walking. Whatever thought had crossed her mind, she kept it to herself. By the time Jonathan stepped off the plane, the terminal was buzzing with activity. Families reunited at baggage claim, business travelers hurried toward connecting flights, and tourists snapped photos in front of airport signs. Everyone moved with purpose, yet there was an underlying tension in the air, a sense that people were bracing themselves for the next hurdle. Would their luggage arrive on time? Would their connection be delayed? Would security lines stretch endlessly? Walking through the crowd, Jonathan noticed details he'd overlooked before. The janitorial staff worked tirelessly to keep the floors clean despite the constant foot traffic. Ground crew members coordinated silently, guiding planes to their gates with precision. And everywhere he looked, passengers carried expressions ranging from exhaustion to frustration to quiet determination. He stopped near a coffee kiosk, pretending to browse the menu while observing the interactions around him. A young couple argued quietly over missed boarding passes. A solo traveler tapped impatiently on her phone, muttering under her breath about spotty Wi-Fi. At the nearby gate, an elderly man struggled to lift his carry-on into the overhead bin. No one offered to help him. Not the harried gate agent, not the passengers already settled in their seats. Finally, another senior citizen stepped forward, hoisting the bag into place with a grunt. Jonathan winced. How many moments like this happened every day without anyone noticing? People weren't just dealing with logistical challenges, they were navigating emotional ones too. Travel brought out the best and worst in people, exposing vulnerabilities they might hide in other parts of their lives. And when airlines failed to meet basic expectations, those vulnerabilities only deepened. With each step, Jonathan grew more determined to fix what was broken. But he knew change wouldn't come easily. Skylink Airlines was a massive operation with layers of bureaucracy, entrenched habits, and competing priorities. Convincing his team to prioritize customer experience over cost-cutting measures would require more than just passion. It would take strategy, persistence, and proof that these changes mattered. Back at headquarters the next morning, Jonathan called an emergency meeting with his executive team. The room buzzed with curiosity as he walked in, still wearing his disguise from the flight. His assistant raised an eyebrow but said nothing, clearly unsure whether to laugh or call security. Ignoring the stares, Jonathan took his seat at the head of the table and laid out his plan. "Listen up," he began, his tone firm but calm. "I just spent 6 hours flying economy class on one of our own planes. I heard firsthand what our customers think about us, and I don't like it." He pulled up a presentation on the screen behind him, summarizing the feedback he'd gathered. Cramped seating, poor Wi-Fi, bland food, lost luggage, the list went on. Each point was backed by specific examples from his trip, making it impossible for anyone to dismiss his findings as anecdotal. "This isn't just about complaints," he emphasized. "It's about trust. Every time we lose a bag or delay a flight, we're eroding the trust our customers have in us. And once that trust is gone, it's incredibly hard to rebuild." The executives exchanged uneasy glances. Some scribbled notes, furiously. Others leaned back in their chairs, arms crossed defensively. One vice president cleared his throat. "We've heard similar feedback before," he said cautiously, "but implementing changes across the board will be expensive and risky." Jonathan nodded, acknowledging the challenge. "I'm not saying it'll be easy, but we can't afford to ignore this anymore. Our customers are counting on us, and if we don't step up, someone else will." To drive his point home, he shared a story from the flight. The mom who'd spoken so candidly about her struggles. Her words had stuck with him, reminding him that behind every ticket sold was a person with real needs and expectations. She chose Skylink because it was affordable, he explained. But affordability shouldn't mean sacrificing dignity or respect. We owe it to her and to everyone else to do better. The room fell silent as his words sank in. Slowly, heads began nodding. A few team members chimed in with ideas proposing pilot programs to test new seating designs, faster Wi-Fi systems, and improved training for frontline staff. Others suggested launching a feedback hotline where passengers could share concerns directly with leadership. By the end of the meeting, a clear roadmap was beginning to emerge. Over the following weeks, Jonathan threw himself into the transformation effort. He visited call centers, shadowed gate agents, and even joined ground crew shifts to understand their challenges. Everywhere he went, he encouraged employees to speak openly about what worked and what didn't. Transparency became his mantra, both within the company and with customers. One afternoon, while reviewing progress reports, Jonathan received an email from an unfamiliar address. The subject line read, "Thank you." Intrigued, he opened it immediately. Inside was a heartfelt message from the mom he'd met on the flight. "I wasn't sure you were serious when you gave me your contact info," she wrote. "But after our last trip, I have to say, I noticed a difference. The staff was friendlier, the check-in process smoother, and my boys actually enjoyed the snacks. Whatever you're doing, please keep going. It matters more than you know." Jonathan sat back in his chair, rereading the email several times. Her gratitude meant the world to him, not because it boosted his ego, but because it validated the changes he was fighting for. This wasn't about numbers or statistics. It was about people. Real people whose lives intersected with his airline in meaningful ways. Inspired by her note, Jonathan launched a new initiative called Fly with Jim. Passengers were invited to share their experiences, good or bad, via email or video calls. Those who participated received personalized responses from Jonathan himself, along with updates on how their feedback was shaping future improvements. Word spread quickly, creating a ripple effect of positivity among customers and employees alike. Months later, Jonathan boarded another Skylink flight, this time in his usual attire. As he walked through the cabin, chatting with passengers and thanking them for choosing his airline, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The road ahead was long, and challenges remained. But for the first time in years, he felt connected, not just to his company, but to the people it served. Stepping back into the role of CEO hadn't changed who he was underneath. He was still the same guy who'd worn a baseball cap and listened to two boys complain about pretzels. Only now, he carried their voices and countless others with him wherever he went. The changes at Skylink Airlines didn't happen overnight. Jonathan knew that transforming a massive organization like his wouldn't be easy, but he was determined to see it through. Every morning, he woke up with the same question in mind. How can we make flying better today? It wasn't just about fixing problems anymore. It was about creating an experience that people could trust and even enjoy. After weeks of brainstorming and planning, the first wave of improvements rolled out. New seating designs were introduced, offering passengers more legroom without sacrificing capacity. The Wi-Fi system got a major upgrade, ensuring faster connections for everyone on board. Snacks were replaced with higher quality options, cookies, chips, and healthier choices that actually tasted good. Even the flight attendants received additional training focused on empathy and customer service. But Jonathan didn't stop there. He wanted employees at every level to feel empowered to make a difference. So he launched a program called Every Passenger Counts, encouraging staff to go above and beyond whenever possible. Whether it was helping a nervous traveler find their seat or surprising a family with free upgrades, small gestures added up. Employees who went the extra mile were recognized publicly, both within the company and through social media shout-outs. Slowly but surely, a culture of kindness began to take root. One afternoon, while reviewing passenger feedback from recent flights, Jonathan stumbled upon a comment that caught his attention. A mother had written about how her two sons, the same boys he'd met during his Undercover trip, had raved about their latest Skylink experience. They loved the new snacks, the faster Wi-Fi, and especially the friendly flight attendant who'd given them coloring books to pass the time. Reading those words brought a smile to Jonathan's face. These weren't just numbers on a report. They were real moments that mattered to real families. Feeling inspired, Jonathan decided to reach out personally. Using the email address she'd provided months earlier, he sent her a message thanking her for sharing her thoughts. Then he included a special invitation. Next time you fly with us, I'd love to welcome you aboard myself. Consider this my way of saying thank you for your honesty, your patience, and your trust. When the mom read his email, she couldn't believe it. At first, she thought it was some kind of scam. Who emails random passengers inviting them to meet in person? But then she remembered the man in the baseball cap, the one who'd listened so intently to her complaints and promised to make things better. Could it really be him? Curious, she replied cautiously, asking if he was serious. Jonathan responded immediately. Absolutely, he wrote. I keep my promises. A few days later, the mom and her boys arrived at the airport for their next trip. As they approached the gate, a uniformed staff member greeted them warmly. You must be the family Mr. Reed is expecting, she said with a smile. Before they could respond, Jonathan appeared, dressed in his usual sharp suit but wearing the same warm expression she remembered from their first meeting. Hi again, he said, extending his hand. I'm glad you came. The mom blinked in surprise, unsure what to say. Her boys, however, lit up instantly. Hey, it's the guy from before, the younger one exclaimed, pointing excitedly. Remember, you sat in front of us. Jonathan laughed, crouching down to their level. Of course I remember. How could I forget those honest opinions? Turning back to the mom, he added, I wanted to personally ensure your flight goes smoothly today. If anything comes up, don't hesitate to let me or anyone else know. For the rest of their journey, the family enjoyed VIP treatment. Their seats were upgraded to premium economy, complete with extra space and complimentary meals. The flight attendants checked in regularly, making sure they had everything they needed. And when they landed, their luggage was waiting for them at baggage claim. No delays, no damage. As they prepared to leave the terminal, the mom pulled Jonathan aside. Thank you, she said softly, her voice thick with emotion. Not just for today, but for listening, for caring enough to make a change. Jonathan nodded, feeling a lump in his throat. It's the least I can do, he replied. You reminded me why we're here, to serve people like you. Word of the family's experience spread quickly among Skylink employees and passengers alike. Social media buzzed with stories of improved service and thoughtful touches. Travel bloggers praised the airline for its renewed focus on customer satisfaction. And slowly the tide began to turn. Complaints dropped, satisfaction scores climbed, and loyalty programs saw record sign-ups. Still, Jonathan knew the work wasn't done. Transforming a company as large as Skylink required constant effort and vigilance. To stay connected to his customers, he continued flying undercover periodically, always eager to hear fresh perspectives. Each trip taught him something new, reinforcing the importance of staying grounded, even as CEO of a global airline. One evening after returning from another undercover flight, Jonathan sat alone in his office, reflecting on everything that had changed since that fateful day. He thought about the boys and their mom, whose candid feedback had sparked a revolution within his company. He thought about the countless employees who had embraced the challenge of doing better, one interaction at a time. And he thought about the thousands of passengers who now boarded Skylink flights with hope instead of dread. Looking out the window at the city skyline, Jonathan realized something profound. Success wasn't measured by profits or market share. It was measured by impact, by the lives touched, the trust earned, and the connections made. His undercover experiment had started as a quest for answers, but it had become so much more. It had reignited his passion for leadership and reminded him of the humanity at the heart of every business decision. With a deep breath, Jonathan picked up his pen and began drafting a letter to all Skylink employees. In it, he thanked them for their hard work and dedication, acknowledging that true change was only possible because of their efforts. He also shared a personal promise, to never lose sight of the people they served. Our job isn't just to transport passengers from point A to point B, he wrote. It's to create experiences worth remembering. As he signed off, Jonathan felt a sense of peace wash over him. The road ahead would still have its challenges, but he was ready. Ready to lead with humility, listen with an open heart, and serve with purpose. Because at the end of the day, that's what being human and running a successful airline was all about. This chapter closes not with fanfare, but with quiet resolve. Jonathan Reed may have started as a billionaire CEO disconnected from his customers, but he ended up something far greater, a leader who understood the power of listening, learning, and leading with empathy. And though his journey was far from over, one thing was certain. He'd never forget the voices that guided him along the way. The transformation at Skylink Airlines wasn't just about shiny new seats or faster Wi-Fi. It was about something deeper. It was about rebuilding trust, one passenger at a time. Jonathan had started this journey because he wanted to understand what his customers were going through, but somewhere along the way, he'd discovered something even more important, the value of connection, real, human connection. Every decision he made from that point forward was guided by a simple principle. Put people first. Whether it was redesigning the boarding process to reduce stress or training staff to greet passengers with genuine smiles, every change aimed to make flying less of a chore and more of an experience worth looking forward to. But Jonathan didn't stop there. He knew that feedback was the lifeblood of improvement, so he kept the Fly with Jim initiative alive. Passengers could still send emails or videos sharing their thoughts, good or bad, directly to him. What surprised many was how quickly Jonathan responded, not with generic replies but with personalized messages addressing their concerns. Some even received handwritten notes thanking them for their honesty. One day, while reviewing responses from the initiative, Jonathan came across a video submission from a young traveler. The boy couldn't have been older than 10, sitting cross-legged on his bedroom floor, holding up a piece of paper covered in drawings. "Hi, Mr. Jim," he began shyly. "I like flying with your airline now, but I wish you had better snacks for kids, like fruit gummies or chocolate chips." Jonathan chuckled as he watched the clip. Something about the boy's earnestness reminded him of the two brothers he'd met during his undercover flight. Inspired, he forwarded the video to his catering team with a note, "Let's make this happen." Within weeks, Skylink introduced kid-friendly snack packs featuring gummies, crackers, and juice boxes. When the boy's mom posted a photo of her son happily munching on his new favorite treat mid-flight, it went viral online. People loved seeing a CEO who listened and acted on such small yet meaningful requests. As word spread about these changes, loyalty to Skylink grew stronger. Families booked flights knowing they'd be treated well. Frequent travelers raved about the improvements to their friends and colleagues. Even critics softened their tone, admitting that the airline was finally stepping up its game. But perhaps the most rewarding part for Jonathan was watching his employees embrace the shift in culture. Flight attendants started carrying small notebooks to jot down passenger preferences, a trick they picked up from Jonathan himself. Ground crew members went out of their way to assist elderly travelers or parents juggling strollers and luggage. Gate agents smiled more often, offering explanations instead of excuses when delays occurred. These might seem like minor adjustments, but together, they created a ripple effect that transformed the entire travel experience. To celebrate the progress, Jonathan organized a company-wide event called Skylink Day. For one afternoon, executives swapped roles with frontline staff. Board members worked as gate agents, managers served meals on board, and Jonathan himself spent hours loading bags onto planes alongside ground crew members. It was exhausting work, but it gave everyone, including him, a fresh perspective on the challenges faced by different parts of the operation. At the end of the day, sweaty and sore, Jonathan gathered his team for a debrief. "Today reminded me why teamwork matters," he said. "We're all in this together, no matter what our job title is. And if we keep putting people first, we'll continue building something special." His words resonated deeply. Employees left feeling appreciated and motivated, ready to tackle whatever came next. Passengers noticed the difference too. Comments poured in praising not just the service but the attitude behind it. One frequent flyer summed it up perfectly in a review. "Flying used to feel like a transaction. Now it feels like coming home." Months turned into years, and Skylink became known as one of the best airlines in the industry. Awards lined the walls of headquarters, but Jonathan cared more about the stories behind them. Stories of families reuniting without hassle, business trips running smoothly, and nervous first-time flyers finding comfort in kind words from the crew. Each story reinforced his belief that success wasn't measured by trophies. It was measured by impact. On the anniversary of his undercover flight, Jonathan decided to do something symbolic. He boarded another economy-class flight, this time openly to thank passengers personally. As he walked down the aisle, shaking hands and chatting with travelers, he felt a profound sense of gratitude. These were the people who had inspired him to change, not just his airline but himself. When the plane landed, Jonathan stood near the exit bidding farewell to each passenger as they disembarked. A little girl tugged on her mom's sleeve and whispered, "Mommy, that man looks like the boss." Her mom laughed. "He is the boss, sweetie." The girl's eyes widened in awe. "Wow, do you think he listens to us?" Jonathan overheard and knelt down to her level. "Absolutely," he said with a smile. "Your voice matters more than you know." That moment stuck with him long after the flight ended. It reminded him why he'd embarked on this journey in the first place. To ensure that no passenger ever felt invisible again, to remind himself and everyone around him that behind every ticket sold was a person with dreams, fears, and hopes. Looking back, Jonathan realized how much he'd grown since that first undercover trip. He'd gone from a CEO disconnected from his customers to a leader who understood the power of empathy and accountability. His disguise had taught him to see the world differently, not as a billionaire businessman, but as an ordinary traveler navigating the same frustrations as everyone else. And though he no longer wore a baseball cap or faded jeans, the lessons he'd learned stayed with him. They shaped every decision he made, every policy he implemented, and every interaction he had. Because at the heart of it all, Jonathan Reed wasn't just running an airline. He was building a community. Years later, when asked about his proudest achievement, Jonathan always gave the same answer. "It's not the awards or the profits," he'd say. "It's knowing that we've made a difference in people's lives. That's what keeps me grounded. Grounded, not just as a leader, but as a human being. After all, the sky may stretch endlessly above us, but it's the connections we forge on the ground that truly define us." And for Jonathan, those connections would forever remain the foundation of everything he did.